Hey, welcome to the Lutheran Worship Podcast, presented by the Center for Worship Leadership at Concordia University, Irvine. My name is Steve Zank, joined as always by my good friend, Kip Fox.
Hello.
And we're going to jump in today's episode. We are looking at the New Apostolic Reformation's theology, or the NAR movement. And the reason why we're doing this is because many of the songs that are produced that are very popular in the church in America today are associated with the NAR movement. And so to understand those songs, to better understand how to use them, how to think about them, I thought it was important to look at the theology of the movement. And so this will be a series, Kip. We'll do a few of these things, maybe 3 of them, maybe 4. We'll find out as we get to recording and getting through them. But today, I'd like to start with a precursor, exploring some of the philosophy behind doctrines and how doctrines work together, since we're studying the NAR as a system. And the second is the relationship between doctrines and practice, since we'll be exploring the NAR's products, the songs that often come out of the movement. And so a little bit of a philosophy episode will be helpful, exploring these 2 topics. And to get into the conversation, I want to use an anthropologist named Clifford Geertz. And to get into him, a story from my own life. When my daughter, I think was maybe 2 or 3, I witnessed her very first sarcastic moment. And then it was really fun because I took a big bite of chocolate cake, and then she looked at me and I said, "How was that cake, honey?" And she said, "Oh, it's terrible." Right? And then she gave me a big old wink. And from that moment on, I was like, "Oh, she's sarcastic. This is great." And so I was really excited about that.
That's awesome. I believe sarcasm is a gift of God, but as all good gifts from God come to us, they can certainly be turned and used for evil. So, let's just be careful as we get sarcastic out there, everybody.
Yeah. Watch your sarcasm, all right, guys? So Clifford Geertz, the anthropologist, pointed out that when you observe a wink in particular, actually, there could be any number of meanings behind the action. So behind this first level of meaning, the physical, I just saw someone's eye close rapidly and open. There could be any number of deeper meanings behind it. And so for one example, it could be 2 close friends having observed something that they just talked about, something funny maybe, and one friend winks to the other and like, "Hey, it's our secret joke. We know what's going on." Maybe it's someone that you want to be a significant other, and so you wink like, "Hey, let's go out to a meal sometime together, get to know each other." Or maybe you just got like some dirt in your eye and like you're really, really like trying to get it out, and then someone misunderstands that you're trying to ask them out on a date, and then it gets really awkward. So,
yeah, I've never tried the wink.
I don't think it's a thing anymore for that.
All right, well, it can work.
Well, all right. Let's in the comments just maybe mention if you've ever tried that.
Let us know if you've ever winked at a young lady or a young man.
Yeah, and how it went.
If you're married today, let us know.
And so this little kind of exercise helps us realize that there's things you observe and there's deeper meaning. And sometimes when it comes to practices and worship services, the 2 need to be separated. There's one example I think about in the Lutheran service book, the hymn, "God Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise," which I can look up right now on weaveworship.com. Right now, check it out. It looks like it's
Great
LSB,
idea.
LW. It came in through the Worship Supplement 69. So the author is W. Chalmers Smith, who's a Unitarian. And so what's interesting about this idea is he produced this song, and clearly as a Unitarian, now I'm like, oh, immortal, invisible, God only wise, kind of this oneness of God means something different to him than it does to a Lutheran context who has a Trinitarian view and a certain kind of way of thinking about God. And so what's interesting to note is this is just an example where maybe when Chalmers Smith winked when he wrote the song, he meant one thing. And now when we sing it today in Lutheran church, the words are the same, but actually the meaning and the things we think about behind it are quite different. And that's something that we're used to when it comes to worship and song selection. That's one kind of hook to hang your hat on, is to talk about these practices produced by the NAR movement. Really?
Yeah. I see many examples in modern worship lyrics today where I certainly notice lyrically something is brought forth in a song, and I think to myself, I don't think that the worship leader, or maybe the pastor, perhaps the whole congregation knows or understands that use of words or that phrasing is really speaking to a specific audience and has a whole history behind it. Now, it doesn't always mean that those songs can't live within our repertoire, but sometimes to be honest, I'll cringe a little bit and say that really is a word that winks to a whole group of folks that have a different doctrinal belief. And so we just want to kind of be aware of that and be careful. And again, like your example, immortal, invisible, God only wise. Look, we have a history of using songs from other doctrines of faith, but that wink is definitely present in a lot of the songs that I've seen recently. And
it depends on how much meaning you put into the wink. I'm thinking of now the scene from Indiana Jones, where in their class the young woman like writes something on her eyelids. But you know what I'm talking about when she winks at Indy?
Right.
Sometimes we do that with our songs, is we have a certain meaning behind the wink, behind the expression, and we embed it in the lyrics so that there's no way around what we mean. And in those instances, it's a lot harder to use that in different contexts. So it kind of depends on how much you put into the wink itself.
And I'll also say on the positive side, you use the term winks. With our songwriters at the Songwriter Initiative, I use the term nods. In terms of speaking in architectural terms, architects will often put little nods to the landscape within which they're building, to little nods to that landscape. And so for our Lutheran writers, I actually love when we wink or nod at our Lutheran congregations with the language and the understanding that we have within our body of doctrine.
Organic architecture. Who's that guy out in Arizona?
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
Frank Lloyd Wright.
Wisconsin and the like. So that's an important kind of groundwork as we get into talking about the NAR theology. There's a relationship between theology and practice, but it's a complicated one. It's a dynamic one. So the second part I want to talk about as a precursor to talk about the theology is the way doctrine works generally. So like my sister, who's a bit younger than me, growing up had a charm bracelet. You ever seen those, Kip?
Oh, yeah.
He gets like a blank bracelet with hooks or something like that. And you buy charms and you kind of slip them on. And if you like dolphins, you put a dolphin. If you like books, you put a book. Whatever. I don't know, whatever you like. But the relationship of the charms.
I love dolphins, by the way. Thanks for...
Maybe it'd be worth just asking what kind of charms you would put on your charm bracelet, Kip.
Oh, probably like a Lutheran Worship Podcast charm. Probably chocolate chip cookie charm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I would say. That's about it.
I could see that. I could see that. And so the charms have no real strong relationship one to another. The only real relationship is that you like them. And I think there's a mistake we can make if we think that that's how doctrine works. As if, like, I love the Pentecostal approach to like exuberance and excitement. And I love the Reformed use of beards and election. And I love the Lutherans' way of thinking about the sacraments. And I love the Methodists' way of kind of being the front porch. And you can kind of relate to all the Christians and sort of have a really strong connection, even doctrinally and openness doctrinally. And so that's not how it works. That's not how doctrines work. And in fact, what we find is that when we talk about doctrine, oftentimes we're talking about a body of doctrine. That's a term the church has used to describe kind of a systematic theology. It's a body of doctrine. And so what I'd like to do here is I'd like to quote Robert Kolb. And in this quotation, Robert Kolb talks about the way that Luther thought about doctrine pastorally, not just as a system in the sky somewhere that just is mathematical, but the doctrines have very important pastoral implications for the people. But then also he talks about the way that they work together. And so I'm going to offer this quotation here in full. So kind of get loose, get comfortable. Here's a little quotation from Robert Kolb. He says this: "Therefore, Luther's concern for proper and faithful interpretation of the biblical teaching is always reflected in his ardent concern for proper pastoral and mutual Christian care. Luther confesses the truth of God's word, not only for the sake of God and of truth, but above all, for the consolation of Christ's people. Therefore, Luther was deeply concerned that the whole body of biblical teaching be taught faithfully. That is, now, for the benefit of its hearers. A teacher of the church may mangle, pervert, ignore, or hide a topic or an article of faith, while still remaining faithful to biblical teaching on other topics. However, that falsely taught article is not like a pearl, the absence of which, when lost from a necklace, may hardly be noticed. Instead, now he uses the analogy of a body. Instead, the mangled arm of eschatology, like a bad teaching on eschatology, or a severed leg of baptism, may indeed not prevent the heart from beating or the head from thinking, but at a minimum, it will make the heart and head ache, and it may introduce such trauma as to stop the head and heart from functioning as well. A teacher of the church may introduce only a little bit of infection to the body of doctrine, and it may indeed only disable the shoulder or a proper understanding of the Christian calling to be responsible to a spouse, but it may also spread to the bloodstream and the proper distinction of law and gospel and disable the entire body. So a long quotation, thanks for letting me go through it in full, but really what he's suggesting now is the way doctrines work is they work together. And not only that, but together for the benefit of those who believe, of the hearer. And so when we study the NAR, what we're going to do is we're going to see, I think, 5 different articles of faith that work as in a system together. So we're preparing you for that we're looking for a whole system and how it works together.
Yeah, I love that. Before we get into that, I just would love to point out, we often think of bodies of doctrine and keeping those bodies of doctrine consistent as being maybe sometimes more living in the academic realm of things. But I love how Kolb talks about Luther seeing it as an act of pastoral care. And so, again, in line with everything we talk about with the Center for Worship Leadership, these very important but serious topics are being discussed for the sake of pastoral care, for the sake of understanding the weight that they carry to each and every individual that's in our congregation, and not just sort of this pie in the sky. Let's make sure that all the T's
Right.
are crossed and the I's are dotted.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, that's the heart behind all of this that we do is the pastoral import of music and worship and things that God does through them. And the
So
responsibility.
tell us more about
Yeah.
NAR, Steve.
Dude, let's do it. Okay, so in the time we have left, let's introduce a kind of very broad stroked way the movement. The NAR movement, in a lot of ways, finds like a nexus point of several distinct movements. And so I'm going to kind of offer a few different movements and what they entail, but they all sort of gravitate around each other. There is no NAR denomination, for example. There is no, we'll talk about Dominionism. There's no Dominionism denomination, but these are movements that kind of find themselves coming together. So the first thing I'll mention, these are all kind of shades of what's going on. The new Apostolic Reformation is going to entail many of these movements usually, but the shade that title brings is the idea that the apostolic movement, the idea of apostles speaking a fresh word from God, hearing a new thing from God, God doing a new, fresh thing through these apostolic leaders, that is at the heart of the NAR movement. And usually these leaders are like they have everything together in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, they're very financially prosperous. And they actually often brag about kind of the way that God's blessed their life as a model for others to see. And that brings in some of the prosperity gospel movement. It's very, very much adjacent to the NAR movement. And the prosperity gospel movement, if you've heard this before, is the name it and claim it movement,
Right.
the health and wealth gospel movement. The idea of breakthrough is a very common theme we'll discuss in the NAR movement. But it's the idea of how do you get a breakthrough in your life, financial or spiritual or physical or relational. And the way you get that breakthrough is through a theology of sowing and reaping. And that's the prosperity gospel side, is you have to give something to get something. And so we'll get to it later in future podcasts. But I think that makes sense for now as a thumbnail.
Yeah.
And like I think is it Benny Hinn, who's a big proponent of this in the past? A lot of prosperity gospel preachers you could find out there. Another movement then is called Dominionism. And this is a pretty key one. You've heard of the physical and spiritual as a kind of a way of separating out the world between that which is just physical and that which is spiritual. They prefer the terms the natural and supernatural. And so they talk about the things that happen in the natural and the things that happen in the supernatural. And in Dominionism, then, every ailment in the natural is caused by a disturbance or situation in the supernatural. And so in Dominionism, what you're trying to do is you're trying to, in the natural, create avenues for the supernatural to flood into the natural. And you're trying to align yourself so that you experience blessings in the natural. And the way you've heard of this guy, Sean Voigt, he's a guy who goes around different towns in his revival concerts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's a proponent of Dominionism because the way this works, like kind of in a picture or like a bit more of a philosophy or even a theology, is let's say there's strife in downtown Phoenix, Kip. It's bad. There's strife. There's immorality. There's problems in the schools. You might say the problem is in the natural, but really that's not the real problem. The real problem is in the supernatural. And the problems are really bad. There's some kind of demonic being that's sort of claiming the city.
Okay.
And so you need to go in to the city and create a revival atmosphere. Often that's through praise, setting up altars. That's like a metaphor for setting up an altar of faithfulness to God, so that you kind of win the supernatural battle and drive out that demon so that the things in the natural will be much better. And so if you listen to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, you'll find that there's an episode of Mark Driscoll doing kind of these demon trials. But people who have addictions and issues, they would try to find out what demon's oppressing them and then cast that demon out. And so Dominionism has this very strong sense of the relationship between the natural and supernatural and how those two interact and how you get the supernatural blessings in the natural. And that's a big part of that. Many NAR movement churches reflect some version of that theology. And the last one I'll mention that's very popular is, and it's related to Dominionism, is the 7 Mountain Mandate. You heard of that one, Kip?
No.
It's the idea that it's from Revelation 17, I think, verse 9. And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. And that's interpreted as the 7 areas in our life that influence society: family, religion, education, media, entertainment, business, and government. And it's tied to Isaiah 2 in a lot of proponents' view. Now it shall come to pass in latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains. And these 7 areas of influence, then, a lot of times the NAR movement, these are not denominations. These are like independent movements that sort of revolve around each other, like gravitational forces. They tend to be together. You can find a Dominionist who's not also a prosperity gospel person, but they do tend to come together. And people who, under this Dominionistic theology of the 7 Mountain Mandate, are really trying in their theology, are trying to take over in their mind a very positive way all 7 of these seats of influence in society. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so over the next few episodes, what we'll be doing then is exploring the theology of the NAR movement, and as a result, some of these tangential movements, to understand the churches that are producing some of your most favorite worship songs you hear on the radio, and to see the connection between their theology and what they're writing. And once you see that connection, I think you'll be able to better understand the winks or the nods that are present in the songs that maybe didn't make sense to you before. And like this line, I don't fully understand it. But once you understand the theology, you'll understand like really quickly, like, oh, this is what this is. And now I understand what's going on here. So that's our intention for this little series on the NAR movement.
Well, I think it's a great time to mention our new online database from the Center for Worship Leadership, weworship.com, where many of our songs are doctrinally reviewed, and there are all sorts of some of these songs that we're going to be talking about, this movement, this NAR movement. One of the ways to understand better what we're dealing with is to join Weave and see where your songs live in this space doctrinally and all those things, Steve.
Yeah, awesome. We hope that you enjoyed this series on the NAR movement. If you're like, man, this is getting really doctrinal for me, and I wish we could go back to some simpler things, just wait. We have a diet of conversations. But thanks for joining us on this little journey into the NAR movement, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.